And Sam Baltrusis is a published author. His latest book is Ghosts of Salem, Haunts of the Witch City, in his third of his ghost book trilogy. And his books are available on Amazon.com. His website is www.bostonhaunts.com. And we'll be discussing a lot of his paranormal activities, of course. And please welcome Sam to the show this evening. Hey, Sam.
Hey, Solaris. How's it going?
It's good. How are you doing?
Good.
Excellent.
Just surviving Christmas. We got a few days after Christmas. So.
Yeah, it's a survival mechanism, isn't it?
Exactly.
Did I pronounce your last name right, Baltrusis?
Yeah, Baltrusis. You got it right.
Excellent. I want to make sure I did that. Well, welcome. I'm really happy to have you on. So thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Glad to be on.
Yeah, really happy. So you survived Christmas. So tell me what's been going on with you. I know you've got a new book out, and let's talk about what you've been up to.
Well, yeah, I mean, I basically, Ghost of Salem was my third book, and it came out in September, late August, early September, and it did very, very well. So there was a lot of speaking engagements, and I did, ghost tours, and I had a ghost boat in the Boston Harbor. So there was a lot of activity around Halloween. And then after Halloween, I took a kind of a ghost break and kind of focused on my fourth book, which is Haunted Boston Harbor.
Nice, excellent. So can you elaborate a little bit on some of the experiences that have gone on over there?
Yeah, you mean like with the as for the Boston Harbor, or as far as like
the Boston Harbor. Let's start with that.
Yeah, it was the Boston Harbor. So basically, like what I do with my books, I spend like months, sometimes years, doing research. So I'm kind of like a year, 2 years ahead of the game in regards to the research. So I spent most of the summer I did tours for the Boston Harbor cruises in the Boston Harbor, and just to kind of really immerse myself in the environment, into the different islands in Boston Harbor. And there's of course the legend of the Lady in Black, which is associated with George's Island. And so I spent a lot of time on George's Island and kind of just immerse myself in the history. And then I ended up doing a haunted Boston Harbor boat tour during October, which was fantastic, but it was also, the weather was horrible. So it was kind of like Gilligan's Island out in the Boston Harbor when I was doing these tours.
Well, that's kind of a bummer, but did you have any interesting experiences out there?
I did, yeah. I mean, well, there's the Lady in Black. She has a name even. Her name's Melanie, according to legend. So the legend is, I feel like that the legend, like if I try to debunk the Lady in Black story, I get swatted down quickly. So I try not to debunk it. I do think that George's Island is very active, and there's this other potential paranormal activity happening and other islands as well. Boston Harbor was where, if you were different in any way, like if you were Irish or if you're Native American, you were put in the Boston Harbor. It was sort of like where they put everyone that didn't belong in Boston. They put them in the harbor. So there's a lot of pain out there.
Mm-hmm. Like a lot of, I would say, restless spirits to some degree, right?
Yeah, I mean, there were pirates. The Puritans were notoriously bloodthirsty. So if you're a pirate, if you were an alleged witch, or if you were Irish, if you were Native American, if you were, if you had potential, like had smallpox or tuberculosis, you were put out in Boston Harbor.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So I guess there's a lot of interesting anomalies. What kind of anomalies have you experienced? I mean, have you experienced things insofar as lights go, or actually apparitions? I know you mentioned something that I caught on your Facebook page about glasses breaking.
Yeah. Well, tonight, yeah. The thing is, I'm sensitive, so I've been sensitive for a long time. So it's there's a location, like it's called Sacco's Bullhaven, and it was featured in Ghost Hunters a few years ago, and it's been converted into, it's called Flatbread, so it's like a restaurant / candlepin bowling alley, and it was featured in my first book. Now, this place, I don't like going there because every time I go there, glass kind of just breaks, and it's been dramatic sometimes, and other times it's been not so dramatic. Tonight was sort of the not so dramatic, but my friend was visiting from San Diego, and he wanted to meet there. And of course, tonight it was a broken glass night, and I kind of laughed after the broken glass. But the Ghost Hunters actually came and investigated, and they didn't find any anomalies, but they didn't really look into the backstory as to why this location would be haunted. Mm-hmm.
Right. And have you found anything out?
Yeah, I mean, like if you actually dig into the history, which Ghost Hunters has a tendency of not doing, it used to be a movie theater, and the movie theater was fire prone. and it actually burned down. Like it actually like caught on fire like 3 or 4 times. And there was one time it actually caught on fire and it killed the projectionist. And so there's a whole history that was not discussed on Ghost Hunters.
Right, and that's huge when it comes down to it. When you think about it, so it explains it a bit.
I think that like the broken glass. I mean, it's just a theory, but there's like reports of like glass shattering or glasses mysteriously breaking. I kind of looking to see if there was potential, like if there was a fire at the location.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I've been around people who are into the paranormal. They're like ghost hunters, and broken glass is very prominent with them also. And I don't understand it, other than the fact I'm wondering if something's hitching a ride or trying to get their attention, or on a different level too.
I think, and I have a lot of that. Like I think that I wouldn't say like the spirits know that I write ghost books, but I think that there is sort of that going on in my life where things they kind of want me to notice them and to maybe report what really happened to them.
Right. Well, that makes sense because you're doing the work. I would imagine because you're writing about it, you're going to pull them into your orbit, whether you like it or not.
Yeah. The good ones and the bad ones.
Right. Well, have you been around some negative ones?
Yeah, I mean, Salem had definitely had. I started off. I love Salem. I love the history in Salem, but there's definitely a lot of resentment when it comes to, in the spirit realm in Salem, and so I started spending a lot of time there, and it just got really dark really fast. And I still spend time in Salem, but nowhere near as much time as I did when I was researching my book. But yeah, Salem has a lot of negative energy there.
Wow, that's really interesting. Do you think that has anything to do with the harnessing of ritual work there, that maybe it's not as centered as it should be, or is it something entirely different?
Yeah, I mean, if you know the whole Salem is sort of like Halloween City. So
right.
There's the horrors that happened in 1692 with the 19 men and women who were accused of witchcraft, and Giles Corey, who was pressed to death over a 2-day period. We all know about that, but that there's a lot of people who come there who don't really like they're doing necromancy or necromancy, which there are summoning spirits, and I think there's a lot of not non-educated people doing kind of like serious rituals.
Right.
There.
Yeah, I kind of get that too. Although I've only been to Salem once, and I loved it when I was there, but it was a very short time, and of course I haven't been there in years. But I suspect there might be some disoriented rituals going on, which aren't very focused, is my impression. So when you say that you're experiencing that energetically, maybe they're stirring up some things that they're not aware of.
Yeah, I mean, I think that not everyone. I think it's sort of. I mean, in the stores they offer, like candles to summon the dead. It's sort of like this Disney World for, serious stuff. And I think that perhaps that things have been summoned and that they haven't really closed.
Right. Well, they always say don't ever summon anything you can't banish.
Exactly.
I don't know if people are qualified. Some people dabble, they think it's like, I don't know what, but Disneyland is a good analogy, I think, to some degree. But it really is. I mean, you have to work on a very high level of alchemy and spirituality to really understand what's going on between the dimensions and in between the spaces. So, yeah, it's very complex indeed. So did you ever feel like you had a spirit follow you back to your house?
I mean, not necessarily. I mean, like I'm sensitive, so I kind of know what's going on. But like, I had situations in Salem where I felt pushed. I slipped. Like, I think the spirits were wanting me to I was walking in right by the old burying point, and where there was like the memorial for all the innocents, and there was, definitely where I slipped. Probably like it was really weird how I slipped for like probably 12 feet, wow. And it kind of led me to where they wanted me to go. And I had an apple come from nowhere near Bridget Bishop's her tavern, but it actually wasn't her tavern. It ended up being her property. She was the first woman that was accused of witchcraft and killed. Like, there was an apple that kind of mysteriously rolled from there. So I think the spirits play with you in Salem,
right?
Which is not the case in Boston or in Cambridge or Boston Harbor.
Wow, that's very interesting. It almost sounds like there are tricksters there in Salem, huh?
Yeah, I mean, people told me that. I'm like, yeah, whatever. And then I had that happen several times. So like the apple, and then just me slipping. Like, it was just really bizarre how far I slipped to. It was to a rock that led me to Giles Corey's memorial.
Very interesting. Wow. What do you do to psychically shield yourself? Do you have any type of practice that you do before you enter areas like that?
I just do. I mean, I think a white light of protection. And I think of Mary. I kind of go like more to my Catholic roots, but I think of Mary like a sort of a light of white protection around me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, divine light. So what did you how did you get involved in all this stuff?
Well, I've been a journalist for 20 years, and I was thinking about this today. I'm like, I still do my journalism work in addition to all the ghost work, and I don't know. I actually had a dream, and the dream was pretty profound. And I woke up and I'm like, okay, I need to write a ghost book. I kind of woke up and I pitched the book, and I actually got a book deal. But I've been a journalist. I've done a lot. I've always done this sort of like the Halloween, haunted hotspot story for, whatever like magazine I'm writing for at the time. So that kind of turned into a book deal, and it kind of became sort of like a full-time passion.
Awesome. It sounds like everything was kind of fated for you on that level, huh?
It was very bizarre how quickly and how easily it was able to kind of come together.
Right. Yeah. When you put things out to the universe, it tends to move quickly when things are in alignment. There's no doubt about that. So tell me a little bit about Boston and what's the difference? You talked about the difference in energy and also maybe less tricksters in Boston. What is it, more of an old historical vibration? Yeah, I mean, the Boston definitely, it just oozes history. So when you walk into an allegedly haunted location, you feel the history there. So Salem is equally historic, but the energy in Boston is a little bit more. There was a lot of untold stories in Boston that you kind of feel the people that were whatever marginalized or they were hanged for various reasons. That's still lingering in Boston. Mm-hmm. Okay. Does anybody ever do anything to try to clear that or move that energy, or is it just something that has a residual imprint? Well, I think that Boston really is New Englanders as a whole. They don't believe in this ghost stuff. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of it's sort of like traditional New England. They have experiences, and if you actually talk to people, I have so many people that have gone on the record when I've interviewed people over the years for my books, who they didn't want to actually be quoted. They're like, oh yeah, I've had an experience at the Union Oyster House, but please don't put me in your book. So there's a lot of people believe, but they don't talk about it. Right. Yeah. Well, it's funny because they're probably calibrated for it and almost immune to what's going on there, I would imagine. Just living there for so long. There's a lot of, every city has its own spirit. Mm-hmm. And Boston has, it's Revolutionary War. It's right. The Patriots, and it's the beginning of America. That's if the ghosts that are kind of still here are kind of from that era, from pretty much turn of the century, but also from 1776 in that era. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's pretty neat, actually, I think. Have you encountered any apparitions or anything from the Colonial War? Yeah, the Revolutionary War. I had Boston Common. Because I started I was doing the story for Stuff magazine. This is sort of what led me to write the books initially. But I was doing research with my assistant, who's British and complete skeptic, and I was in the Boston Common and didn't realize the Boston Common was where people were hanged. Hundreds of people were hanged in the Boston Common. Mm-hmm. And we were at the cemetery, which is the central burying ground. I saw what looked like a girl in the cemetery, and I jumped over the fence, which I would not recommend doing because it hurt. But I jumped over the fence and the apparition went away, but I didn't actually realize that she was a common apparition. So I've seen her, and there have been reports of a Ben Franklin apparition as well. Nice. That's kind of cool. And weren't you didn't you just do a play and you were Ben Franklin? No. Okay. Now okay, go ahead. No, I've never, I'm a tour guide. I've done tours, but yeah, I've never been a Ben Franklin. Okay. But you weren't a character in a play recently. No. Okay. No, I don't. Who was that? I'm not an actor. Okay, I wasn't sure that it must have been somebody else, but I could have sworn. Okay, never mind. Sorry. All right. Well, no. so what other ghosts? But I did manage Santa Claus, though. Santa Claus is I do a side gig in around Christmas where the Santa Clauses that appear at local malls actually manage Santa Claus. So he kind of looks like Ben Franklin. Oh, how interesting. That's different in a weird way. I always think of A Christmas Story when I think of the Santa Claus thing, the movie A Christmas Story, but that's pretty fun. So, well, the apparition sounds interesting. Some of the ghosts and the spirits that you've kind of encountered here and there, and of course, I guess a lot of other people have encountered these spirits as well. Yeah, so if you read my books, you'll see that
my introduction, I talk about my personal experiences, but then the books are about everybody else's experiences. So, so a lot of it sometimes is validated from other people, and like if I've had personal experiences, but I do let the spirits guide me. I don't rely. I kind of, before I go into a city to write a book on it, I just trust my intuition to kind of lead me to places where I think are like haunted locations, and then I do the historical research, like, and then get people hopefully to go on the record about their experiences with whatever the ghost is.
That's excellent.
Or whatever the spirit is.
Yeah, I like the way you go into the historical background insofar as that says a lot because, excuse me, because when you're just looking into a haunting in general, I mean, you need to know the parameters insofar as what's really gone on. So I can applaud you for going back and actually looking at the historical imprint and seeing what's happening here.
Yeah, I mean, like my books are history books with ghost stories. I mean, like it's kind of because people they look at it like the Ghost of Boston or Ghost of Salem, and they automatically assume that it's just a paranormal book, but really it's a history book, which people have told me that they use, like the historians of Boston, they feel like that my history actually is very solid, which makes me excited because that's the part that matters the most to me is the history and making sure the history is correct.
Right. I think that's awesome that you're doing that because a lot of people just walk in and they get a vibe off of something and then they talk about hauntings and then they elaborate on something when they really don't understand the background, And I see that a lot with people, not to bash anybody in the field of the paranormal, but there are a lot of people out there who are just kind of picking and choosing and not necessarily looking at the real signature associated with the historical background. So I'm glad you're doing that. That's really important.
We were talking earlier, and I feel like if you watch, because I worked in television for years, and I rarely watch TV, but I did. I went home to Florida before Thanksgiving, and I was watching like Ghost Adventures and Ghost Hunters and all those shows, and they just scratch the surface. They don't actually dig deeper to a location, and you'll see a lot of the locations that are featured in my books. A lot of those places have been featured on Ghost Adventures or Ghost Hunters or what various pop culture TV shows, and it's weird that they don't really dig deeper than just the surface history. They don't go back, like what was like the Hawthorne Hotel that was featured in Ghost Hunters, but according to Ghost Hunters, it wasn't haunted, but they didn't really dig deeper as to like what was the Hawthorne Hotel before the Hawthorne Hotel was the Franklin Building, which had a history of fires, and there was a lot of weird stuff that happened at the Franklin Building before that. So they have a tendency of just scratching the surface.
Right. And do you think the Hawthorne Hotel is haunted? What is your impression of the energetic there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's residual. I think that it's kind of everyone wants it to be haunted. If you talk to people who work and live there, they would probably say it's not. But they're definitely, if you go anywhere in Salem, there's energy there.
Right.
It's something about the spirit of the land. You can pretty much go any place and get a ghost story.
I agree. Well, I think there's obviously there are a lot of witches there. A lot of ritual work is being done there, whether it's positive or not so positive. So you've got all sorts of frequencies, transmissions, circles are opening up, vortexes are opening up, and I'm sure it's kind of like a busy little highway on the paranormal level.
Yeah, and it sometimes could be scary. I mean, like I said, I don't spend a lot of time. I love Salem. I love the history there, but there's a lot of energy when you walk there. It can recharge your batteries, but then it can quickly drain your batteries too.
Right, and can go both ways. Yeah, I agree with that too. Although I felt really charged when I arrived there, but yeah, I get what you're talking about for certain. And have you noticed poltergeists at all in any of your investigations or any of your research?
Yeah, I mean, my last place, I lived in Davis Square in Somerville, which is right next to Boston, and there was a female apparition in my place when I was writing my first book, and she was a seamstress, and she was a poltergeist. And we called her Scissor Sister because she would move scissors around the house, and it turns out she was a seamstress. And actually, while I was writing my first book, I was on the top floor, and I was looking down, and I saw what looked like a woman wearing a nightgown walk across, and freaked me out, and I ended up actually leaving the place. So my place now is not haunted, but thank goodness, knock on wood. But yeah, I had that experience. But yeah, poltergeist it's fairly common, but probably more common in Salem than it is versus Boston. Like Boston, it's not as common of a phenomenon. It is in some people's homes, but. Right. not in the locations that I cover in my books.
That's really interesting. I would say that sometimes I've heard also that poltergeist can be kind of an imprint from somebody in the house who's actually creating the energetic and moving. But yours was obviously a spirit of some kind. But I have also heard that other people can conjure up that type of activity in their home by their own psychic energy field. Have you heard that?
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it's tied to me. I mean, like because like with her, well, the thing is with the seamstress, I had another roommate who lived downstairs, and I'm like, is this place haunted? And he's like, did you see her? And I'm like, yeah, because he didn't even tell me the whole backstory. In fact, people wouldn't rent the place because of this female poltergeist. And I felt summoned by. I felt comfortable there, and I think that she was very supportive of what I was, because I was writing my book upstairs, and so I felt like she was very active while I was writing the book.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. Well, to me, it seems like if I was a spirit in the illusion of, I suspect I would probably be hanging out with somebody who's writing about ghosts or spirits also, or at least trying to inspire them in some way. So that would make sense.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, like, I think it's important to, keep my distance, especially because I do. So if people have been marginalized, like a lot of the spirits, like kids or people, like turn to, like the Irish, for example, the Irish that came into Boston, there horrible things happened to them. Like they were put into like camps, like on like Long Island and also on Deer Island, and it was, like I feel kind of a connection to them because like my background is from Ireland as well, my mom's side, so I feel kind of a connection to the Irish that came here. And so I don't know, I feel like I want to help them, but I can't help all of them. So my goal is to kind of like set boundaries, I guess, with the ghosts, and kind of like let them know they can't come with me, and that I'll tell their story, but just kind of keep their distance, and I will tell their story eventually.
Right. Well, yeah, I think that a lot of people interact with things they don't really understand, on a lot of different levels. A lot of people who dabble in the paranormal and this and that. So, yeah, and to me, I would say if they're in that space, it's probably a good way just to kind of send some kind of an energetic just to kind of keep them in a peaceful space. But, yeah, I suspect they could be kind of a nuisance after a while.
Well, I mean, like for example, the woman, the seamstress at my old house, like I really liked her. Like I connected with her, but she was also things that happened. For example, we were doing repair work on the outside of the house, and like ladders would fall and paintbrushes would go missing, and people wouldn't finish working on the house because of the things that were happening on the outside. So I'm not saying that she necessarily pushed the ladder, but it can cause problems too.
Well, that sounds a little mischievous, don't you think?
Yeah. She was definitely a poltergeist. Yeah.
You have to watch out for the ones that are destructive, if you ask me. Yeah, and that's where I would pretty much, hold my ground against something like that, for sure.
Well, especially in like glass breaking, like that's a little scary for me. If they're trying to get your attention, I think, and I've been pushed before, but I kind of view the pushing as like they're maybe trying to let me know that that they're there, or like trying to for me to get my attention. So, but the glass breaking is kind of intense, and I'm not necessarily thinking that there's many things that can cause glass to break. I just find it odd that this place that's been featured on Ghost Hunters, I've had bizarre glass breaking experiences there several times. So. Right.
Yeah, that's not a coincidence if you ask me. And as I've mentioned earlier, I know a lot of other people who are, paranormal investigators, writers, who have experienced things with glass breaking. And it's usually some kind of a destructive force. Not sure what it is, to be honest with you. But yeah, there's definitely something afoot. And I would say I would pay attention to that. Also, light bulbs. I don't know if you're familiar with that, where the lights tend to surge out and break. Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have that. I mean, like I go through light bulbs like a lot, and I think it depends on my energy as well.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say. Yeah.
And like lights will turn on. I think that's a phenomenon where people they're kind of like conduits to energy, and I definitely have whatever that is. I don't really look too much into it, but lights will burn out. Especially if you're like intense energy, and the light bulb will. I've had light bulbs like not only burn out, but I've had light bulbs kind of crack before too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like your energy field for certain, without a doubt. And I suspect the more you do this type of investigative work and historical research and writing, the more you'll get amped up.
Yeah. I mean, it's also like with that sort of energy is kind of keeping it at bay and kind of using it for good, and
Right.
and not that I'm not saying that I'm going to go around and like burn your light bulb out or whatever, but kind of realizing that that's kind of who I am and kind of use that as to help. And so and I went from like actually being terrified of my experiences with the paranormal to kind of being energized because it just kind of clicked where I'm like, I've been a journalist for 20 years, and these people have stories to be told. So I kind of switched from being afraid of the spirits to wanting to tell their story.
Yeah.
That's when I would have this shift kind of happen within me, and then it kind of opened up this floodgate of spirits wanting their stories to be told. And I'm like, wait, hold on, I can only write one book a year here,
But you're cranking. You're doing a lot of books. That's great.
Yeah. And I feel like it's like what I'm supposed to do, and I feel passionate about, especially with the haunted Boston Harbor and with Salem with the witch trials. I mean, there was so much injustice that happened in Salem, and to be able to kind of retell it with a paranormal lens and also a historical lens, kind of it was very liberating for me.
Right. Well, I agree with that. And also, the thing is, I don't think people understand that when things like that happen on a traumatic level, what happens to the spirit and the soul and the essence and the imprints and the psychic residue. I mean, all this stuff stays behind in some form of a fractal or whatever you want to call it. And of course, we have this to this day. I mean, look at the timeline we're dealing with from the old world to now. We still have issues and imprints because of the trauma that was done to these, due to these horrific acts.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, like, kind of getting to the dark side of Salem, I mean, I think these people that were savagely killed by the Puritans, I mean, I think like Giles Corey, there was always the talk of the Giles Corey curse, and I'm like, whatever, that was like 300 years ago. And I'm telling you, like, you can feel it. You can feel the anger associated with Giles Corey.
Well, can you elaborate on that for the listeners who don't know?
Yeah, I mean, Giles Corey was the gentleman who was accused of witchcraft in 1692. He actually, his wife Martha, he actually turned her in. It was his third wife. He was sort of like a landowner, and kind of like a stubborn landowner. And so he was brought in, and he actually didn't plead guilty or not guilty. So that the form of punishment was to be pressed to death. So he was pressed to death over a 2-day period. And according to legend, the Sheriff Corwin, actually was standing over on top of him. He kept saying, "More weight, more weight, more weight." Giles Corey did. And supposedly his tongue kind of came out of his mouth, and the sheriff put the tongue back in. And I would be really pissed too if I was pressed over a 2-day period.
Right.
So that energy, you can just feel. There's photos and reports, and supposedly if you see Giles Corey, something bad will happen in Salem. And there's been that legend's been around for years, and according to many people, actually something bad does happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, it makes sense to me. I mean, if somebody did that to me, I'd be cursing them too. So,
yeah, exactly.
I mean, anytime somebody gets tortured, with unjust cause, I mean, obviously, yeah, bad mojo, if you ask me, without a doubt. And have you, so are you familiar with other curses over there?
Yeah, I mean, there's the I forget her name, but one of the women, I think it was Sarah, that she was I guess cigar smoking or pipe smoking woman who was accused of witchcraft, and she supposedly said a curse to make you drink blood. I forget the exact curse. It's in my book. I forget exactly off the top of my head, but yeah, there's other curses as well. But the Giles Corey curse is more well known, and I believe in it, and I think that definitely he's very angry. I do in my book, I talk about his second wife, who's in the old Bearing Point, who we've seen a full-bodied apparition of a woman, and people are like, why is this woman, heading in this direction? And if you look at the way that the apparition is heading, she's heading towards where Giles was pressed to death. And no one's really kind of made that connection. I'm romantic at heart, so I was like, oh, maybe she's, in the afterlife trying to see her, because they were very much in love. And I do believe that she's heading in that direction to where Giles was being pressed to death.
Certainly sounds like it. What an imprint that is, huh? That's quite interesting. Wow. And has anybody ever captured this imagery on any type of photograph or on video or anything?
Yeah, I mean, like if you look on YouTube, if you look in old Bearing Point, and again, it's sort of like the scratching the surface, like, oh, we saw a full body apparition of a woman, and they didn't like necessarily look at where it was coming from. It was coming from Mary Corey's grave, in the cemetery, and and that didn't really necessarily make the correlation that that Mary Corey was Giles Corey's second wife, and so and I've seen it on YouTube and stuff of what looks like a full-bodied apparition.
That's really fascinating. Do you think these spirits are trapped, or is this just kind of like a fractal or a psychic imprint from that timeline?
I'm a big believer in a psychic imprint. I think that like residual hauntings, I think are definitely more the norm in Boston and Salem than poltergeist or other activity. I think that there's the stone tape theory of like sort of like leaving a psychic imprint, especially if there was disaster, like something horrific like a murder, suicide, or disaster, or being pressed to death, that's going to leave a psychic imprint on a location.
Right. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So what areas are really charged versus areas that are less charged, say, for example, in the Salem area?
Well, I mean, Salem, period, is charged. I mean, I think that the spot where generally, like, cemeteries aren't normally the most haunted. Like, everyone thinks the cemetery is like where like the dead people go. But the reason why Salem cemeteries are haunted is because horrible things happen there. Like, for example, with Giles Corey, the Howard Street Cemetery, which was built in the 1800s, was exactly where he was pressed to death. So that's a very active area. I think, anywhere on Essex Street, and also by the waterfront is extremely, extremely active, like the Custom House and the whole area near sort of like the Derby Wharf area. Like, that whole area is very active as well.
That makes sense. Do you think people are getting temporarily possessed by the spirits over there?
I think that there's a lot of dabbling with stuff that they shouldn't be dabbling with. And not to say that everyone. I know that there's people that, there's a lot of circles in Salem that are they're well established and know what they're doing. But I think there's a lot of people that kind of come and they kind of dabble with it, and they really probably shouldn't.
Right. I see that also. Yeah, a lot of I don't know what to call them these days, but I get it. Yeah, totally. Amateurs, I guess, is the word.
Yeah, amateurs.
For sure. So what has been the most impactful haunting experience you've ever had so far?
Well, I mean, the one in my house with the sister, that was pretty impactful. I think I looked like I was in New York, and I was I was walking by Washington Square Park, which I walked by regularly on a regular basis, and I felt what felt like someone grabbing my leg. And I didn't realize that was a mass grave for people with smallpox back in the turn of the century, 1800s. And that was pretty it was very profound too. And I've had a lot of, when I was in Salem, I was doing a tour, and I was by the Samuel Pickman House, which is right by the Central Burying Points, and the whole story there is associated with a man being possessed, actually, and killing his wife and then killing his daughter. And yeah, I mean, I walked by the location. It was a very intense, sort of like a burning sensation on my chest. And when I got home, there was scratch marks on my chest.
Wow.
And that freaked me out. Yeah, that was kind of when I said, because I was loving Salem, and I was kind of like loving digging the history, and that was sort of my experience with Salem that kind of made me not be a little bit afraid.
That's interesting. So it sounds like you're really empathic, highly psychic and very empathic. Is that about right for an assessment?
Yeah, that's right.
That's really interesting.
It's a gift and it's a curse. I mean, it's
right. You have to learn how to shield and breathe and do all sorts of interesting higher consciousness work. Yeah.
Yeah, and for me, it's sort of important to kind of turn it on and turn it off. I mean, I think I was able to kind of turn it off for a couple of weeks, which was good, and I kind of had to turn it back on today, for the interview. So it's good to
nice.
It's good to be able to turn it off, for a little bit, and then when you turn it back on, it's like, I mean, really what happened is like the glass shattering at my dinner kind of forced me to turn it back on.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Well, you're among friends here at the station and the listeners, so hey, you're in good company for sure. Have you ever encountered anybody living who's sent some bad mojo, say, for example, in that area of Salem where they're doing a lot of craft work?
You mean like people, specific people, or
Right. Well, I was just wondering if there were anybody who's actually infusing more of a trickster energy through their rituals that maybe puts a little bit of a boot or impact on some of the paranormal out there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to name names, but yeah, I mean, if you read certain books, you can kind of see that they do.
Right. I would say so too, and that's kind of a disservice to the craft, in my opinion. But that's where the tricksters come in.
Yeah, I mean, like for example, if you look like Ghost Adventures, there was that going on, and if you look at the sort of like what happened in Ghost Adventures, they went to the witch house, which is beautiful. Actually, the witch house is on the Jonathan Corwin house is on the cover of my book. Mm-hmm. So much history there. And if you look at the show, I mean, I did interview Nick Groff, who's no longer on Ghost Adventures, but he did investigate the house, and what they found at the house was not historically accurate. I mean, they supposedly contacted Bridget Bishop, who was a real person. She was the first woman that was executed for witchcraft in Salem, but she would never be in the Jonathan Corwin house. And supposedly someone summoned her over into that location to be on TV. I'm like, okay. Yeah, so like stuff like that.
How are they summoning these spirits, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I mean, like this is like legit, like bloodletting necromancy, mm-hmm. which is an ancient ritual which I believe strongly not to do.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, so but the people who are the paranormal investigators, like the mainstream people, are they using Ouija boards? I mean, how are they connecting in with these quote unquote spirits?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's like candle work. There's a lot of incense burning, and there's a lot of like actual incantations where you're mm-hmm. summoning spirits.
Right.
And when you're doing a bloodletting, which I'm very much against, like you don't cut yourself and put it into to summon a spirit. Mm-hmm. So I think that's happening there too.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't think I know what's happening.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all. And of course, there's such a higher way to navigate through spirituality. I mean, that's the bottom line. And of course, a lot of people don't get it. And I think they think it's more powerful to be more primordial insofar as, the raw essence of life force blood and this and that. But literally, it's really about multiversal consciousness. And literally, when you're that advanced on an alchemical level, you don't need to play those cards. I'm sure you're aware of that.
Yeah, a lot of it's for show. But I do think that like those rituals, I think that you don't know what you're going to summon. And getting back to the Ouija boards, I'm not a Ouija board fan at all. And like I ask people are like, oh, my house is haunted, and like this is happening. And sometimes I've seen people opening up vortexes or opening things up by summoning, like they were doing like a Ouija board thing, and you don't know what you're going to get when you do a Ouija board.
Well, a lot of these people, like I said, they don't know what they're doing. They're not experienced on that level where they really need to be. I mean, because they're opening the door to so many different entities and disembodied spirits. And I will tell you one thing: when you get to the lower astral realm, which is nothing but a junkyard, you're dealing with entities that'll lie to you. They'll be tricksters. They'll be disembodied. They won't be productive. They're worthless, to be honest. I mean, I know that sounds harsh, but literally, this is what I'm seeing insofar as a lot of people just dabbling, pulling things in, not understanding the background behind it all. So yeah, it can be a dark water to navigate in for sure.
Yeah, so I personally, like even with my friends, I mean, I work with my assistant who, he's a non-believer. He doesn't believe in the paranormal, but we work great together because he kind of keeps me grounded, like with skepticism. But he, he'll dabble with a Ouija board. I'm like, don't do that. Like that's not a good thing to do. I stay away from Ouija boards. I think I even stay away from like tarot cards. I kind of do tarot cards sometimes, but for the most part, I stay away from like the other stuff. I just rely on my intuition and my God-given. I'm sensitive or empathic to what's going on, so I let that kind of guide me, as opposed to relying on these tools.
Right. Well, that's what they are. They're really just tools to put your energy in motion. I mean, the tarot, if you're really good at what you're doing, you don't need a tarot deck. Tarots are nice. They can be, but literally you don't need those things. You don't need cards. You don't need anything. If you really know what you're doing as a true clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient, and higher consciousness being, then you don't need any of that stuff. And I don't consider them props per se, but really what they are is that they're there as a meditation device to put you in an altered space of consciousness so that you're able to navigate and start piercing other dimensional spaces. And that's really what people are supposed to be doing with them. I don't know what people are doing with them nowadays, But I think the problem
Yeah.
is there's no real serious hardcore training with a lot of these people. They learn
Yeah.
from people who really weren't qualified, and then they start watering down what they're doing and literally bringing in all sorts of garbage, in my opinion, disembodied entities and things that are really non-productive. So that's my take on it anyway. But yeah, I think that we could easily boogie blast a lot of these areas that have what we call miserable spirits loitering around. I mean, and if they're miserable, you have to ask what's preventing them from moving on.
Right. I mean, there's nothing. So from my experience, it's better to just keep them away from me. So I kind of focus on the ones who I want to focus on their stories to be told. And a lot of times, like not every location that I feature in my books are actual. I've had experiences there. So a lot of times, if it's place particularly like asylums, for example, they really freak me out. And asylums are going to be a hotbed of miserable spirits. I mean, like a lot of horrible things happen at these asylums, and I don't do asylums. I just refuse to go in because the energy is too intense there for me.
Mm-hmm.
So with that said, I let other people kind of do the darker stuff, because I try to stay away from the dark stuff and focus more on the historical figures and on people that I can connect with,
right?
So I can tell their story.
Yeah, you sound like you're more connected to the light conscious beings than the ones that are more disembodied. The interesting is I agree with the whole thing about the insane asylums or sanitariums in general. I mean, there's nothing but horrendous. Sometimes there was experimentation that had gone bad, and some of those people were driven into psychosis through some of the stuff that they did to them. So it's just bad imprints left everywhere, man. Bad signatures. Yeah, I don't blame you at all for not wanting to deal with that. And it really is, like I've mentioned before, kind of like a lower astral junkyard, which amazes me how so many paranormal investigators love hanging out in those areas. I mean, they feed off of that type of energetic, and I'm really not understanding what the attraction is, to be honest, unless they're going to clear the area and actually make it a better, more productive energetic.
Well, what you find is a lot of the people that do the paranormal shows, they don't close, so
Mm-hmm.
they bring the spirits with them, and they also open up windows for spirits to linger. So it's
stirring the pot.
Like it's stirring the pot, and I really think that you have to have people that go in to kind of know what they're doing,
exactly.
And myself included. Like I don't necessarily, I would not go into location. I'm not necessarily trying to connect with the spirits. It's just something I kind of do naturally. But if I was doing an investigation or a lockdown, it's really important to close.
Oh, absolutely.
And especially if you're kind of asking them, can we present yourself, and especially the ones who are very aggressive towards the spirits, which I don't like at all. I think that it's important to be sort of not aggressive, and I don't like the come here, ghost, come here, kind of yelling at the ghost.
Yeah, courtesy goes a long way in any dimension, let me tell you.
Exactly.
No manners, but they're going to figure it out, because if they can cry tough on this dimension, which a lot of them do, when they transfer out, they might find that all those entities they were pissing off will be there to greet them, and that won't be very pleasant for them. I'll tell you that much.
Exactly.
Yeah, they better be careful what they do, and once again, you're right. People need to know how to close and make sure that if you're opening up a door, you close that door. You don't leave it lingering open or cracked halfway or whatever, to let more and more disembodied entities or whatever connect in. Yeah, it's very destructive, really.
It's serious, and like getting back to my assistant who doesn't believe in it stuff. When we first started, he would be like, spirits, and it's sort of kind of jokingly. I take it very seriously, everything that I do. So it's important for me not to expose myself to spirits who, both good and bad. I would not let a spirit work kind of like the ghost with the Whoopi Goldberg character. I'm not going to be a medium. I'm not going to actually have a spirit come inside me and inhabit my body. I'm not going to give them that.
No, I wouldn't. No, trust me on that one. Yeah, you don't want to do that. I'm a multi-universal translator on many different levels, and I can tell you, you don't want to do that at all. And have you paid visit to the battlefields? Have you been in, for example, I don't know if you've been to Saratoga Battlefield, but that's extremely haunted. And,
like Gettysburg, definitely. I mean, because I'm working on Haunted Boston Harbor, and part of that is Bunker Hill in Charlestown, and that's Bunker Hill or Breeds Hill is where the battle was. That's very active. So, I definitely. Lexington Concord as well, but I think the Breeds Hill is going to be in my next book, or Bunker Hill is going to be in my next book. I think that there definitely is energy there. Gettysburg, many people that go on my tours, and people, myself included, have seen actual orbs, so like little balls of light coming from the ground. And I'm not a big believer like when people take spirit photos of orbs, but I've seen real orbs, and Gettysburg definitely has them.
Right, I've actually seen them on surveillance cameras as well, and I'll tell you what, they're not like your average little dust particles. Yeah, I saw one out this time, and I was like, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. But yeah, I agree with you on that. I think there's a lot out there that people don't understand yet, and they're just starting to kind of pierce that veil. But yeah, have people heard? I know there's stories of people hearing like singing, or maybe they've actually heard gunfire from some of these old battlefields as well.
Yeah, I mean that's very common. I think it also even out in, because a lot of the islands, Boston Harbor, a lot of them were forts. So we have Fort Warren, which was during the Civil War. We have Fort Andrews, which was during World War II. There's definitely singing at Fort Andrews. There's a piano playing spirit out at Fort Andrews and Paddocks Island, which has I've heard the music before myself, but it's a very common spirit, and there's no one on the island, and you hear music coming from it. I've heard, also George's Island was where that's where they would train before they would head to battle. So there was a lot of like lingering energy there. Not George's Island was where they were kept. The Confederates were kept in prison in Fort Warren. And so there's a lot of energy associated with that as well. Those were all Confederate soldiers kept in George's Island.
Wow, that's really fascinating. Yeah, I've heard a lot of different stories of apparitions and all sorts of different things. So I don't discount any of that. I know it's there, and there's a purpose for it. And I think people should have a little more respect for those who transferred out. That's for darn sure. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And also have respect for like the history of a location too. And I think that a lot of this is not the bashing pop culture investigator show, but I think that it's important for them to respect the location that they're investigating. Yep. Because for example, Ghost Adventures came into the Witch House, or the Jonathan Corwin house. It's like that's the last standing structure that has ties to the witch trials of Syria of 1692, and I would treat that with a lot of respect. I would treat that location. I don't necessarily know if people that are on these shows do respect the locations that they're investigating.
No, I don't think they're paying attention. And to be honest, there's such a thing as having a quiet mind, where you go in and you actually scan the perimeters with a very silent, peaceful, kind of centered, energetic. And I don't get that they're doing that. I think they're just going in with this kind of a intensity, and it's all about, cameras, lights, and Hollywood, and it's not about what's really going on. And it's almost, once again, a disservice. But, I think mainstream has a tendency to do that. And unfortunately, that's like you're teaching children the wrong thing. It's like bad manners. Once again, they say walk gently on this world, and I tend to believe that when it comes to the spirit world. I learned that very clearly when I was out on the Hawaiian Islands, because everything there is like one big cemetery.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you've been there or not, but that's one place that's really powerful. Excuse me. So, I really like it out there, and it's definitely very spiritual. But you understand the different parameters between where we are walking on this timeline versus other spirits that have moved on, but necessarily they're like in between the spaces between two worlds. So, it's really fascinating. So. Well,
I grew up in Pensacola, Florida, which has a lot of battle history as well, and that's it's a very, very old city, and there's a lot of I've had experiences with the paranormal with Confederate soldiers, especially down there. And it's also like in the South, whether like Alabama and Tennessee and Mississippi, it's like way more accepted to have experiences with the paranormal than it is, say, in Boston. So I kind of grew up with spirits kind of being part of my life. And before, like the location that has the most intense energy is, for me, it's New Orleans. I can't walk into New Orleans without, I feel it's overwhelming for me. Like I feel like the city is just walking with spirits. And so I grew up there, and it's like even more, Salem is up there. It's probably like, on my top 3 list as being like very like powerful, like from an energy. But New Orleans is just, it's overwhelming for me.
Right. Well, that's that voodoo mama energy down there.
Yeah.
Big time stuff.
It's really intense.
Yeah, I mean it's phenomenal. I mean, actually, New Orleans. I like New Orleans, but I mean, I can handle a lot of energies and different kinds of frequencies and transmissions. But it's very interesting how we collide with other worlds, and insofar as being able to do, say, quote unquote, ceremony or ritual here on this timeline, and then the repercussions that happen on another timeline or maybe a parallel dimension that's close enough to experience an interaction. I'm wondering if you're just picking up on that with New Orleans, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the energy, for me, it's like fires or destruction. I got to pick up on that. So, like, if there was like an aura of disaster at a location, like that's what I sensed in New Orleans was disaster. And this is before Katrina, the last time I visited. So I don't necessarily know if I was having a pre-Katrina premonition,
Sounds
or
like
if I was having. Yeah, it was overwhelming, and I literally lasted like 2 days in New Orleans because I was just kind of visiting because I was back home, and I love Anne Rice too, so I wanted to see where she lived and all that good stuff, and like follow her New Orleans. But yeah, so I ended up. This is like probably like 6 months before Katrina, and then Katrina happened, and that So yeah, I maybe I was picking up on that too.
Well, it sounds like you're just one big receptor for a lot of different energy. Are you a water sign by chance?
No, I'm a Capricorn.
Are you really? That surprises me. Wow.
Well, my rising is I'm Cancer rising, so
okay, there you go.
Yeah, so I do have the water part as well. But
yeah, where's your moon? Do you know where the moon's located?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I haven't done that.
I was just curious. I just thought I'd ask because you must have a lot of water in your chart because you're like you suck in everything energetically.
Yeah, it's weird. I probably do if I look deeper into my chart.
Yeah. Anyways, we're heading for a break. We'll be right back. Everybody, stay tuned.